Joining in on this discussion is Harshvardhan Dole. He is the Vice President, IIFL Securities. We've also got with us Harry Dhaul, who is DG at IPPAI. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for taking time out and joining in. To begin with, then, let's just start off by discussing the outlook then on the overall power generation trends. And Mr. Dhaul, I'd just like to get in your view at a time when, we are looking at a major re-rating for the power sector as a whole. Do you believe that we are seeing coal inventory at comfortable levels at the current juncture? Your take?
At the moment are comfortable. There are likelihoods of having a few bumps as we go along because of the increased demand and the various other issues. But I must say the government is doing a stunning job. They come out a lot of innovation, for example, movement of coal from, say, Paradeep to the west coast and then up to the north, and steps like that, and making sure that the inventories are in place so that the consumers and the generators don't face any difficulties in the times to come. So I think as far as coal strategy is concerned, 10 out of 10 for the preparations for this year from the government side.
Okay. Let's get in your take then, Harshvardhan, given the fact that, we have seen the Power Ministry in their latest directive talking about all generation companies importing coal for blending purposes, largely on the back of the surge in power demand. How are you looking at this latest directive and the implication on some of the companies?
Well, clearly, if the power demand continues to grow the way it is, hypothetically, if power demand continues to grow at, say, 12%, then clearly, relative to the domestic supply, the demand is going to be significantly higher. And in order to avoid a situation that we saw last year, I think the government seems to have taken a pragmatic step, more of a step to ensure that there is no crisis at a later date, and perhaps directed the utilities to import a bit of a coal. However, I must caution that the demand growth of power is actually quite linked to the availability of working capital within the overall SEBs. If the working capital dries down, because we have seen that none of the SEBs have taken tariff increases, and the much awaited reforms are getting certainly not fast tracked, then the demand growth may slow down and the need for imports to that extent may not even arise. So at the moment, this seems to be more of a precautionary step rather than something which is coming out of dire need.
Harry, good morning. Happy New Year. Welcome to ET Now. So, we've got the coal situation at a very comfortable level. We are perhaps going to see a reduction in the reliance of imports as well. It'll be interesting to see how we're going to meet the ambitious target when it comes to green energy and renewables. But in the run-up to that, this is 2023, is the last full year we'll have before general elections. We all know what has happened in the past in the run-up to general elections, the kind of freebies that you also see. Do you think things are going to be different this time around? Just the kind of noise that is being made, or should I say the lack of noise that's being made?
Is that for me? Who's the
Yes.
question to? Is it for me? Yeah? Who's the question to? Is it for me?
Yes, it's for
Hello?
you.
Yeah, it's for me. Well, I think, politics and the whole framework that goes with it will definitely be around. I don't think it'll go away. One of the reasons why perhaps the Electricity Amendments Act was put on the back burner for the moment. The amendments are required and they're very interesting, but I think you're right. There may be a slight delay on getting it going, but I still feel that we are on the right track. And as the previous speaker said, something very important is there has to be enough working capital for the state distribution companies to be able to run efficiently, to meet the power needs of the country. I think power needs to be looked at more as a national security issue now, rather than just, the way it is being looked at differently in terms of PSUs and private sector and all that. So I think we need to keep this in mind and change our thought process from a national security point of view. And doing that, we need to make sure that state distribution companies have enough working capital available. There are a lot of pressures building up on them, even before the elections have come into play. So I think that is going to be a challenge, and I'm sure the government is keeping an eye on it. There have been some steps that one is able to see, but we need to see a little more, maybe a lot more, since the elections are around the corner, and people need to get the comfort of getting power supplies. Talking about freebies as such, I don't think it's a freebie. If you look at the Electricity Act, they're supposed to be subsidized in cash by the government in the annual budget, state governments in the annual budget every year. So I think somewhere along the line, someone needs to focus on the fact that state governments do have an obligation under law to support the state discoms. And the state discoms, thanks to the regulatory commissions, are under obligations to make sure that consumer interest is taken care of. So I think this matrix is very much there, and you always have the constant conflict of public good versus private profit and so on and so forth. But I think the time has come, and the industry is matured enough to look at things in a manner where we can look upon this, perhaps lift all of this politics and whatever that goes with it, and look at electricity as a national security issue.
Okay, that is of course very interesting. The act was withdrawn, but coming to you now, Harshvardhan, you made this pertinent point as well, which Harry picked up as far as the working capital of the discounts go. It should also be pointed out at this juncture that the outstandings have halved in the year that's gone by. It's about 62,000 crores, if I'm not mistaken. But Harshvardhan, is this also the time when we're seeing the centre also direct that, start looking at more imports of coal to get our act going when it comes to the renewables? Last time round when we had the auctions, when we saw the tariffs also being set, they were negative, and we saw how the industry reacted. We've seen how renewable players have even fizzled out and disappeared.
I think from a national security perspective, we need to put up more renewable capacity. A, it is green. B, it is significantly cheap than the conventional resources. The issue, however, continue to remain the same. Land acquisition and runaway increase in capital cost are sticky issues, and there is no quick fix to it. There has to be coordination between the center, state, and the developers so that the process of land acquisition is streamlined. There has to be, coordinated efforts in order to keep the capital costs under check. And of course, adequate financing has to be made available to the whole sector. I mean, theoretically, if you were to achieve the 500 gigawatt target that center has placed, each year, we need to add at least 40 to 45,000 megawatt of green capacity. The numbers are there in front of you, and a significant effort needs to be put in order to meet that target. So yes, I'm quite enthused by the tall target that the center has set, but then there has to be coordinated effort between all the stakeholders for it to be, a reality.
Okay, quite enthused about the tall target set by the government, but needs a cohesive effort across states as well as centre government. Harsh, but let me ask you, in terms of stock-specific action, what are your top recommendations from the power sector? Is it going to be a bit of more defensive play with the likes of PFC, REC with respect to the dividend, support also, or is it going to be one of those generators, the likes of Tata Power, JSW Energy?
Well, what we like is essentially sustainability of the revenue model, cash flows, and attractive return ratios. And when we apply these three filters, the only name that kind of stands out at the moment, it is NTPC. NTPC each year is set to add at least 6 to 7,000 megawatt of capacity, which is coal and renewable based, which should lead to standalone and consolidated earnings growth anywhere between 8 to 12% over the next 3 years. And this is going to be non-dilutive growth. And to keep the things even more attractive, the dividend payout has been consistently higher, which is offering a very asymmetric payoff, which means that the downside is fairly limited. And if the delivery of earning continues, then there is a massive re-rating ahead of the stock. So when we apply these three filters, NTPC, is the top name that emerges as per our style of recommendation, and that is our topic at the moment. The other names that you mentioned, we'll be quite cautious and we'll be selective on those.
Okay, so NTPC might be poised for a bit of a re-rating. It's a top pick in the sector, but remain cautious and selective about the rest of the names in the sector. Mr. Harry Dhaul, wanted your take with respect to the budget just around the corner. We had seen that over the last couple of years, the focus of the government had shifted to, let's say, the last mile connectivity, transmission, etc. Do you expect this year to be a bit more different and focus coming back to, let's say, generation as well? Because the capacity addition, at least thermal, was missing in the last 4 to 5 years.
Well, I think the last 2, 3 words that you said are very important. Uh, Thermal capacity has been lagging behind. We are all focusing on renewable. Look at what's happening in Europe. Okay. Look what's happening in England. Look what's happening in other parts of the world. Electricity prices, typically, for example, in England, have gone up from maybe £1,400 a year to £4,000 a year, £5,000 a year. Some of these countries are going bust trying to subsidize the consumers. Maybe the factors may be slightly different, but the fact is there's a re-roll back to conventional power from renewables, because renewables is a great idea, but it cannot be the sole idea. It cannot be the sole idea to meet the power requirements on a 24/7 basis. That brings me to the budget. The budget should look at, and I'm sure it will, stuff like storage, stuff like green hydrogen. But at the same time, the budget also should try, the Ministry of Finance should also try and tackle the big problem that the power sector faces, and that is getting payments on time from discoms. You are stuck with a 25-year PPA. You're in the 5th year. You're not getting paid. You're running around. You go to courts. We borrow from banks to make sure that you don't default, and then you end up in a situation where very undesirable, but that's the reality of today, where a government entity owes you money, the government bank is taking you into insolvency, and you are going to be in a mess. It doesn't really help. And then typically what I've seen is the banks are selling off that asset at about 10%, 15%, 20% of the value. And not only have you lost X amount of generating capacity in the country from a national security point of view, but you've also gone and lost, the banks have lost a lot of money. And that worries me, because the scale at which this is happening, I'm sure that the government can come up with some kind of an arrangement where if there is a government liability by virtue of which you are getting into a default situation, there should be a set-off. I'm sure there's some simple mechanism to sort that out, where government banks can have a direct connection between the recoverables from government and therefore not put the entrepreneurs in default. Lastly, you have a situation where you're stuck in a 25-year PPA, right? And you're sitting and say you're 5, as I said. And if you do not supply, you get penalized. If you supply, you die. So that kind of situation is something which I hope the government looks at, because it's really beginning to affect the capacity building of the sector. Because it's all right to say we want private sector to come in or government to come in, but you have to have a smooth dispute resolution process. And I'm not going into the realm of why it is happening in terms of the political situation. But in the meantime, the government needs to build a buffer. I don't know how they want to do it, at what extent, but this is the need of the hour if we really want to see the power sector growing as fast as possible. And the same thing applies, by the way, to renewable. You set up a renewable project, as my friend said, land and other issues are there, it's all sorted out, the plant is running, you don't get paid. If you don't get paid, you're back to square one. And there are a lot of stressed assets floating around available at 10%, 15%, 20% of the value, and then there's still no takers. So I think this is something which I hope in this budget, the Ministry of Finance comes up with something, because this is a burning issue right now.
All right, thanks very much for putting all of those details into perspective with respect to the entire power sector, the steps that need to be taken. And as Harsh has well said, there's no quick fix to resolve the power sector woes.